Hello, everyone, and welcome to Talk Nerdy. Today is Monday, February 16th, 2026, and I'm the host of the show, Dr. Cara Santa Maria. And as always, before we dive into this week's episode, I want to thank those of you who make Talk Nerdy possible. Remember, this show is and will always be 100% free to download, and the way that we keep it going is by relying on the support of individuals just like you. If you'd like to pledge your support on an episodic basis, all you've got to do is visit patreon.com, that's patreon.com/talknerdy to learn more. This week's top patrons include Krister Jansen, Chuck Blell, David J.E. Smith, Daniel Lang, Mary Neva, Thomas Sidovich, Gabo J., David Compton, Brian Holden, Ulrika Hagman, Pasquale Gelati, Joe Wilkinson, Jonas H., and Namita Aneskins. Thank you all so very much. All right, let's get into it. So this week I had the opportunity to chat with Mindy Weisberger. She is a science writer and media producer. She worked at so many cool jobs. Like after she studied film at Columbia, she produced, wrote, and directed media for the American Museum of Natural History in New York. So she's got, videos about dinosaurs and astrophysics and biodiversity and evolution, and they're in museums and science centers all over the world. She also is a science editor for Scholastic and did a lot of on-camera work presenting science experiments and doing voiceover for science videos and making original classroom materials to help support science learning. And of course, you've probably read her work because she has bylines across science platforms like Live Science, CNN, Scientific American, Space.com, and How It Works magazine. But she has a new book out. It's called Rise of the Zombie Bugs, The Surprising Science of Parasitic Mind Control. So without any further ado, here she is, Mindy Weisberger. Well, Mindy, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
I usually say me, and that time I said us, which is weird because it was a royal us. I promise there's nobody lurking behind me other than my dog, but he doesn't speak English. But
does he still consider himself to be a co-host?
True. I mean, yes, he does make many appearances. Shout out to Killer, who is 15 years old now, 16 in May. Doing okay, though. Slowing down quite a bit. Sleeping probably 22 hours a day. But for those 2 hours he's awake, he seems to be enjoying life. So I know.
That's awesome.
So I'm excited to talk to you about your new book, Rise of the Zombie Bugs. But before we get into parasitic mind control, I want to, of course, learn a little bit more about you. You're a science writer. You're a media producer. Formerly, you were an editor at Scholastic. And
Yes.
Tell me if I'm wrong here, but when I think Scholastic, I think kids' books. Is that
Yes,
a huge misconception?
No, not at all.
Okay.
Scholastic is quite big, and I think so. One part of it is the publishing arm. So obviously they publish children's books, but I was with the education division of Scholastic. So I was a science editor for these online units, science units, on all of these different topics: life science, space science, human health and biology, technology, all the STEM topics. And so this is one part of what Scholastic does. Of course, when you say Scholastic, everyone thinks, book fairs, and yes, of course, that's part of it too. But yeah, what I was doing was more in the academic or educational side of things.
Yeah. And so, being a science writer and having previously done editing in that sort of academic and especially STEM field, I'm curious, I've had a lot of people on the show. Some of them might identify themselves as science journalists. Some might identify themselves as science writers, which is different. And some might identify themselves as science communicators, all sort of under a similar umbrella, but different roles. And I noticed that generally speaking, there are two paths that people take, even if their paths are quite meandering. A lot of people are, I guess, academically trained kind of as scientists or through a science curriculum, and then they find writing. And then we've got other people who are trained as writers who then find science. I guess sometimes people are, I don't know, a professional attorney or something, and then they switch gears. But it does seem to be the case that those two paths are pretty common. Would you fall into either of those camps?
I do. I guess I do sort of. So I was actually trained as a filmmaker. I went to film school.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So that I did. So I was a writer. I was a writer before I went to film school, and then obviously there, my writing focus kind of turned to stuff that was obviously stuff for films. But I actually did not really have any kind of science background growing up, or as part of even part of my college education. The only science courses I took were courses that I had to. That were requirements. It just wasn't something that really spoke to me. I've always been a fan of science fiction. I started reading science fiction probably when I was in high school, and still do today. But science itself, I didn't I didn't get it. I didn't see what people saw in it as interesting. And it wasn't until I started working for the American Museum of Natural History as a media producer, where I actually started meeting scientists and talking to scientists and seeing what research was all about. And all of a sudden, that was my eureka moment, and I was like, "Wow, science is fascinating, and all these people are really interesting. And why did nobody tell me this before?" So that was my kind of roundabout path towards science communication. Started because I was a writer and a visual storyteller, which brought me to the American Museum of Natural History, and that sort of threw the gates open and kind of set me down the science communication path that I'm on today.
And so since then, has that been your primary focus of all of your work? You really kind of made that decision. This is going to be the area that I spend my professional life in.
Well, learning about science and how it works and the stories behind science just really it started something for me that is still going on in terms of awakening my own curiosity and my sense of wonder about how the world works and how people figure out how the world works. And I guess that just wasn't something that I really delved into deeply before. But then once I started, it just raised, it opened more and more questions, and it became something that that I just found really professionally and also personally really, really interesting. And so to the point where even outside of work, if I was just outside taking a walk and I happened to see a couple of snails on the sidewalk, I'd want to stop and look at them and think, okay, like where did they come from, and what kind of snails are they, and what might they be doing? And so it just kind of awoke this sense of curiosity about the world for me that I think in a sense had always been there, but it became much more specific in terms of really wanting to understand, like, what's the backstory here, like how do people figure out through observation, through study, through all the tools that scientists have at their disposal, how do they answer these questions, big and small, about what's in the world and how the world works and what's our place in the world and how does it all fit together?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I'm curious then about a full-length book, because this is something that is wildly different than reporting in even long form. I mean, long form kind of pieces can take a lot of reporting. They can take a lot of work, but a full-length book is like a whole other beast. And I'm curious when and how you made the decision to dive in that way.
Well, one of the I think one of the things that's fun and interesting about doing short videos or articles is that your story has to be really, really focused, and sometimes in the course of researching a story or reading a paper and writing an article about it, I would be doing research and I would start to go down these rabbit holes, and that would open up all of these new questions and introduce all of these new topics that were tangentially created to what I was supposed to be working on. And in their own way were equally interesting, but we're really not significant enough to be part of the final story. And it always made me a little sad to have to put them aside and go, yeah, well, okay, that's interesting, but that doesn't fit here.
Right.
And that's actually one of the nice things about doing something like writing a book, is that you do have more of an opportunity to really go down some very interesting rabbit holes, and really kind of just wallow in the details that make a story feel fuller and richer and more complete. And this particular topic, behavior manipulation and zombification, just the more that I wrote about individual studies that I came across of examples of this, the more I realized, this is way more widespread than I had ever imagined. It's deeply weird. It's very gross, and and the more I learned about it, the more I wanted to learn. So that was kind of my first clue that this would actually be a really good subject to pursue for a book. And in fact, the research stage for this was just going through dozens and dozens of papers, and what was really satisfying about that was finding these connections, finding these similarities in these in these totally different groups of zombifiers and the hosts that they zombified. There, even if they were not necessarily being studied as groups by scientists, even if the science that was being done on them was a little more localized, being able to look at them all together and start to see patterns, that was something that was really exciting and satisfying, and that's something that you really only have a chance to do if you're doing this kind of bigger project like a book.
Absolutely. So I'm curious about the topic itself, right? And obviously, we're going to dig deep into these terms and these definitions. I sort of want to ask like a really big picture philosophical question, but I'm going to put a pin in it before, because I feel like we can't go there until we talk about what is a zombie bug, or like, what is this idea of zombification? You mentioned behavior manipulation, which I think is a great kind of term to describe what's going on. So maybe without getting into too much of the weeds, what's the big picture here? What feature of these creatures captured you and said, I want to know more?
Right. Well, I mean, zombies, as you might have noticed, are having a bit of a moment in pop culture, and kind of have for like a decade at this point. I mean, since The Walking Dead, which really, I think, for a lot of people was kind of a turning point in zombies taking over pop culture. But there, in terms of movies and comics and TV shows and games, zombies are kind of everywhere right now. But they've been around. I mean, they've been a staple of pop culture for a pretty long time, and zombie lore has been around for decades, and people have very strong opinions, especially film people, about what makes a zombie and what defines a zombie and how many types of zombies there are. But from a scientific perspective, when scientists talk about zombies of the natural world, they are talking about organisms that are being manipulated by a parasite in a way that changes their behavior, but it only benefits the parasite. So obviously there are some types of parasite infections that will change behavior, like say, for example, if you get an infection and you have an immune response to fight it off. The nature of that immune response can change your behavior. You rest more, or you feel hot, but these are,
you want to drink a bunch of soup, but
yeah,
that's
exactly.
That's not the goal of well, I shouldn't say goal. Ooh, getting in the weeds already. But that's not what the parasite itself is doing. That's what my own immune system is doing to me.
Exactly. And in the long run, that's something that benefits you. That's something that actually helps you fight back against the parasite. The difference is in a zombie situation is that the way that the host's behavior is being changed is something that only benefits the parasite.
Yeah. And so in a way, it's not really like a zombie in the way that we think about like the undead. It's more like a puppet master, like Invasion of the Body Snatchers or something.
Kind of, yeah. I mean, the thing is, yeah, there's so many nuances to what a zombie means when you're talking about like a pop culture zombie, right? And I think for a lot
True,
of
true.
people, the kind of at the top of the list is it's a zombie is undead,
Hmm.
and but that's not always necessarily true. I mean, obviously there are pop culture zombies where you see a person dies and then they're resurrected and they're lurching around and they're all oozing and gooey and bits of them are falling off and stuff like that. But that's not necessarily always the case. I mean, there are certainly zombies where someone is exposed to whatever the infectious agent is, and there is a dramatic physical change and then a behavioral change, and they are not
Yeah.
themselves anymore. They may look like themselves, but they are they want to catch you and eat your brain.
Right. Or
And
they're like doing some sort of hive mind behavior, or
yeah,
basically something is controlling them.
right, right. And so yeah, so that's when you talk about so zombies, zombie bugs are not they're not they're not undead in that sense. They are alive, and they are infected, and they are being manipulated by the parasite that is infecting them. However, there are some examples of of insect zombies that are manipulated by the parasite beyond death, but that's a different story.
Mm. And so I'm curious then, this basically just looking at the subtitle of your book, and I think this is more of the philosophical question that I want to get into right at the top, because I'm hoping it opens up other avenues.
Mm-hmm.
And I know, because I've had a million authors on the show, not really a million, I'm being hyperbolic, that very often it's a negotiation between the author and the publisher, what they want to call their book, what's going to sell the book, what's,
Mm-hmm.
makes the most sense to the reader. Publishers have a lot of expertise in this area. But Rise of the Zombie Bugs, the surprising science of parasitic mind control. So that's fascinating, because you used the
Mm-hmm.
term before, behavior manipulation. What
Mm-hmm.
is a mind, and do bugs even have them? I think is an important question to grapple with.
Sure, sure. I mean, well, this gets at the sort of bigger philosophical questions, like what is a mind, but also what even is behavior?
Hmm.
And so if obviously, and obviously, if you ask a scientist, you're going to get a much more, yeah, much more specific answer of what the biological underpinnings of these things are. But in terms of what is mind control versus behavior control, all of these examples of zombification that are in the book are zombifiers that are infecting a host, and then through some method, either through chemical manipulation, either they're introducing toxins, they're introducing viruses, they're tweaking hormones and neuromodulators. They are they are messing with their hosts' neurochemistry. They
Hmm.
are tweaking its nervous system. They are taking control of its brain, and in doing so, they are affecting its behavior. So you can argue that there's a difference between a mind and a brain, because in the human sense, and as humans we invented philosophy, so we're able to make that distinction. That there is you can come up with a different definition for mind as opposed to brain. But in this particular case, it's more just looking at the mind as the seat of where whatever it is that makes you who you are, right?
Hmm.
And in terms of insects, we don't we're not quite at the point where scientists can define if individual insects have personalities as we define them. This is something that people often, people talk about their pets having personalities. People talk about animals that they interact with, usually mammals, as having personalities. It gets a little trickier when you start, when you the farther removed these animals are from us and from how we define our own behaviors, right?
Hmm.
But even for insects, there are certain types of behaviors that are understood, that are interpreted as normal behaviors for whatever that particular insect is, for how it survives, for how it reproduces, for how it interacts with its own species, for how it interacts with other species, what it preys on, what it runs away from, things like that. So something that disrupts that, and takes whatever all of these different components are that make an insect behave the way it does, and turns that around and makes it do something that is just so completely off track. That I think it's safe to say is a form of mind control.
Absolutely. And whether the insect is self-aware to know that they're acting differently is kind of a moot point. My assumption, though, obviously, the scientists observing these behaviors are aware that there are behaviors that are out of step with either typical behaviors that these insects would have engaged in previously, or evolutionarily expedient, right? Behaviors. I can venture to guess that other members of the species are also aware to some extent that when they encounter a zombified bug, they have some sort of like worry or concern, or maybe those aren't the right words, but behavior that shows that they're like, what's up with this guy?
It's interesting that you bring that up, because because there's actually one specific example of a zombie relationship, and it's the zombie ant fungus, Ophiocordyceps, which, if you're familiar, are you familiar with The Last of Us?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So The Last of Us, as a game, and then as the more recently as the TV show, did something that most forms of pop culture that look at zombies did not do. It looked at fungi as a mechanism for zombification. So in pop culture, the tendency is to kind of lay it on a virus. Like if there's a zombie outbreak, and to not go any deeper than that. The depth of scientific explanation in most zombie movies is like, there's a virus, and everyone goes like, oh, okay, and then they just move on.
Yeah, that explains it.
Yeah, right. But what they did in The Last of Us, which was really interesting, is they borrowed from an actual zombie ant fungus called Ophiocordyceps, which is a group of fungi that infect ants. And ants are social insects, right? And ants also are very meticulous about keeping contagion out of the colony, because obviously that's that's obviously a really, really important strategy for making sure that the colony stays healthy. So ants that are visibly sick are often removed from the colony, or actually dispatched by their fellow workers, and discarded in a place that scientists call it a graveyard. Colonies tend to have places where they put their dead, and they're not, and they're away from the main area of the nest. So, and Ophiocordyceps, what it does to ants when it infects it, is it, in the final stages of infection, before it kills the ant, it makes them leave the colony and wander away.
Okay.
Now, this is really unusual behavior for an ant. However, from over evolutionary time, scientists in, I think, 2019, they reconstructed the family tree of this fungus, and they traced it back to a common ancestor that likely started out by infecting beetles, but not manipulating them, just infecting them and killing them. And then, because of habitat overlap, the fungus started infecting ants. However, because ants are social, it introduced this little hurdle to the fungus's successful reproduction, because before it could get to the point where it could actually produce spores from the ant it had infected, the colony would likely detect that the ant was sick and remove it from the colony, and therefore that would reduce the fungus's chances of being able to infect more ants. So scientists suspect that this was a driver for the fungus evolving a way to manipulate the ant into leaving the colony
Mm-hmm.
going to a place where the conditions were better for the fungus to reproduce, so someplace with a certain amount of, where the light, the temperature, humidity were good for the fungus. Climbing up a leaf, biting down on a vein of the leaf, and then that is where the ant would die. And then once the
Mm.
ant was dead, the fungus extends a stalk from behind the ant's head with a little lump on it, which is what produces the spores, and then poofs out the spores, and that's able to continue its life cycle, and that's how it makes more zombies. And this is something that scientists say only came about because of ants being social insects, and because this would guarantee that the infected ant would take its hitchhiking fungus zombifier away from danger to some place that was safe for the fungus to reproduce.
It's brilliant. It gets around this very classic sort of evolutionary quirk that, we can, if we understand, Darwinian evolution, and we understand environmental pressures, then we can see how over and over and over different species are going to evolve ways to circumvent, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
disease, right? So something
Right.
starts to catch on, unless it catches on quickly and wipes out because it's novel, or because there's a spillover event. Usually the species will sort of evolve a way to deal with it, and this is a
Mm-hmm.
really brilliant way that then the parasite, because it's an arms race out there, it's
Yeah.
always trying to one up each other. But there's another one that I often think about, and maybe you can help bust some myths around it, or just help us understand it a little bit better. But we often hear a lot of lore around toxoplasmosis, and that's
Mm.
also a parasitic infection, but it changes the behavior of the host to make it more likely to spread, right?
Oh yes, yes, very much. So Toxoplasma gondii. Scientists have been studying this for a very long time, and for a while now, they've known that rodents that are infected with Toxoplasma gondii, they lose their fear of cats.
Hmm.
And this is because the parasite needs to. Cats are its primary host. It means that means that it can infect other animals, but it can only reproduce in cats. So you've got, let's say you've got an infected cat, and it's got a little, colony of Toxoplasma gondii, and it poops out their oocysts, which are
Hmm.
essentially like eggs, uh, and um, and those are often eaten by rodents. So now you've got some Toxoplasma gondii larvae that hatch inside a rodent, and they got to somehow get back into a cat if they want to reproduce.
Hmm.
And so what they do, the way that they have evolved to circumvent that particular roadblock is they change the rodent's behavior. They reduce the rodent's fear, the natural fear of or aversion to the smell of cat urine, and they turn it into attraction. So what
Wow.
happens is these infected rodents, rather than a normal rodent would want to stay far away from cats, these rodents are like, oh, that cat looks really interesting. I'm going to hang out here, and maybe get a little closer. And so, of course, those rodents are more likely to get eaten by cats, and when that happens, then the parasite is exactly where it needs to be. And what's interesting is in recent years, scientists have found that it's not just rodents. They've also
Hmm.
found evidence of chimpanzees that are infected with Toxoplasma gondii. They seem to lose their fear of leopards, which are
Oh,
natural
wow.
predators. Hyenas that are infected with Toxoplasma gondii lose their fear of lions, and so it's there's a lot of interesting research that's being done that shows that the level of manipulation that this parasite is able to wreak on its secondary hosts is
Hmm.
just part of this incredible the incredible strategy that has evolved over likely many millions of years to get it where it needs to go.
That's incredible. And so, what are some of the other examples? I guess I'm curious, it's so hard when you're talking about evolution because our language limits us, and we often talk about it as if it's directed or guided or as if there's like a goal, right? But we know that evolution is not goal oriented. We also know that there is some amount of sort of, help me with this, life instinct.
Where are you going with this?
Like organisms want to stay alive.
Sure.
That's what they do, right? They reproduce, they try to continue on. And, a lot of things have natural life cycles, but there is sort of a life drive. That said, none of these things are intentionally, like the parasite's not like, mwahaha, this is what I'm doing. It's evolved to be able to do this because it was a good strategy that worked for sustaining, these different organisms. But I guess the question is, what are some examples of other, especially insect infecting parasites that change the behavior of the insect to make it more spreadable? Because it's a hard balance, right? You don't want everybody to catch this all at the same time and wipe out the species.
Right.
They have to maintain just enough infection rate to keep being passed on without, devastating the host species.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, it's this is actually something that I was talking to a friend of mine the other day about vampires, as one does,
Like you
and
do, yeah.
The idea that there are some the idea that vampires limit who they turn into additional vampires. That's kind of an important idea because you kind of need to keep a stable population of humans, or you're gonna have nothing to eat.
For sure.
Yeah, and it's like that for zombifiers too. Okay, so actually, I want to talk about forward flies. So these are a very, very, very tiny flies that that change the behavior of ants, and they in parts of South America where many of them are found, some of these species target fire ants.
Okay.
And what they do is it's such a targeted kind of zombification. What they need to do is they need to lay an egg in a moving target, and the moving target is a really, really tiny ant. So they have a very, very high failure rate. They don't succeed at doing this very often. But what scientists have noticed, which is really interesting, is that the arrival of forward flies essentially throws a fire ant colony into complete disarray.
Oh, wow.
And so it disrupts their foraging patterns, and it makes them scatter in ways that actually enable other types of ants to gain a foothold in that ecosystem where otherwise the fire ants might otherwise take over. Now, you may have heard that this country seems to be, is having a bit of an issue, or has been having a bit of an issue with invasive fire ants for a while now. And one of the reasons why fire ants have been able to spread so successfully in parts of the United States is because they lack some of the natural predators that are in their native ecosystems, one of which, while not exactly a predator, is forward flies. And even though they don't have a very high success rate of actually zombifying lots and lots of ants, their appearance is recognized in such a way that it affects the colony's behavior, and it does it in a way that helps to control, kind of helps to control the balance of things in that ecosystem.
So ultimately, both the parasite and the host are able to maintain these steady numbers and keep going. Would you say that that's like a benefit for the host?
Well, I mean, it's.
I guess something can be an ecological benefit without being an individual benefit.
Yeah, I mean, it's I think benefit is such a loaded word.
I
I think
know. You're so right.
it's another factor that is part of what keeps different species in check, just within a habitat, within an environment. And it's a driver for survival. I mean, obviously, for the forward flies, the ones that are more successful at targeting that little tiny ant head and being able to lay an egg in there, they are the ones that are going to go on to reproduce. So that's so being successful at that is part of their success story.
Hmm.
And so it clearly enough of them are succeeding at it that forward flies are still around. And there are probably enough of them and enough ants that even if there is a high fail rate, enough succeed that everyone is able to just keep chugging along forward.
That's fascinating. And how about sort of examples where have you run into anything where it just like doesn't seem to benefit anyone? I mean, obviously the parasite itself is continuing on and it's, finding new hosts and it's not dying out, but
Uh-huh.
ultimately it just like wreaks havoc on the host, on the environment. It just does not seem like a good thing.
Hmm. Let me see. That's an interesting question. I don't know. I, I don't know. I don't know if I can think of anything. I don't think anything really comes to mind. I mean, it's someone always benefits, right? I mean, if the
Exactly. Otherwise, why would it continue? I mean, that's the
yeah,
really
yeah. So
interesting thing.
it all depends on your perspective. So
Hmm.
obviously, if you're the one being zombified, then that if that happens, it's terrible. But if but for the zombifier, it's great.
Yeah, that's true. I guess it's curious thinking about, you mentioned before that there's sort of the difference between the hosts that continue, they're fully alive, they're
Hmm.
just sort of being puppeted or their behavior is being changed dramatically by this parasite. And then there's these weird examples, and cordyceps I thought was one of them as well, where they also will parasitize a dead organism, or maybe they parasitize it while it's alive, kill it, and then use the sort of carcass of the host to
Yes.
help spread.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, that's what's going on with Ophiocordyceps.
Hmm.
Because if you've seen these photos of ants with fungal stalks sprouting from behind their heads, that doesn't happen until after the ant is dead.
Right.
So obviously in The Last of Us, you see these horrific infected humans that are sprouting oyster mushrooms from their heads and from their arms, and they're partially transforming into fungi while they're still alive.
Hmm.
That may be what the ant looks like, but that doesn't happen until after the ant is dead. But its corpse is still very useful to the fungus, just as sort of a launching point for where it's going to send its spores out.
Well, and that kind of makes me think, obviously to scientists, this is a bizarre thing. You're walking through the forest, you see these, the first person who observed these probably wasn't a scientist, by the way, but the first observer sees this sort of furry and like Seussian looking ant with, like you mentioned, these things sprouting out of it that look
Mhm.
terrifying and weird. And you go, okay, something's going on here. Backward calculate. Okay, I'm noticing that there are now these organisms that are these parasitic organisms that are living there. Is that how most of these zombifications are discovered, or are some of them purely been discovered because um, a behavioral change was observed and it couldn't be accounted for by anything other than, oh gosh, let's see if this thing has an infection.
That was actually one of the one of the rabbit holes that I enjoyed going down the most when I
Hmm.
was researching the book, was looking for the earliest examples of scientific observations of zombification. And in fact, one of my favorite examples, the first it's another type of fungus, and it's called Mesospora cicadina, and it infects periodical cicadas. So these are the cicadas that come out in broods every 13 or 17 years. They're the ones that have these really dark black bodies and the red eyes and the orange veined wings. Very, very striking to look at. There was a diary entry in that was written by a man named Benjamin Banneker in 1800. And he was a free black man who was who was a farmer in Maryland. He was also an astronomer. He wrote an almanac. He was a naturalist. And he was the first person to document zombification of periodical cicadas. He was actually one of the first to even document that periodical cicadas were on this 17-year cycle of appearances by just noticing and then counting forward and then noticing again when these insects would appear. But in 1800, he wrote in his journal that the cicadas I'm paraphrasing, they sing very merrily even when their bodies are rotting away. They continue singing, and it was decades later when scientists identified this fungus that was actually infecting the cicadas and not rotting exactly, but what it would do is, as it grew inside them, it would weaken their exoskeletons, and to the point where in many of the infected cicadas, the rear third of their abdomen would basically just drop off, and what was left was an exposed plug of spores. So, and one of the ways that the fungus was changing the cicadas' behavior was it was increasing their sex drive. Now, adult cicadas, mating is pretty much all they do.
Right, yeah, they're born, they mate, they die.
And they die, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So what this was doing was kicking their mating instinct into overdrive. And so to the point where male cicadas, usually in the mating game of cicadas, males have these tymbals, these structures that cicada buzz that you hear. That's the males. So they're the percussionists. And then the females produce this. They flick their wings and they make this. It's like kind of like a snapping sound, like something like that.
Okay.
In fact, David Attenborough, when he did one of his shows about cicadas, he was demonstrating that to a male cicada, and the male cicada just went right for him. So
amazing.
He was able to duplicate the sexy sound of a female cicada. So what this fungus does to infected males, what they do is they flick their wings like females to attract males to them, and then the males try to mate with them, and the spores get passed along, and so it's like sexually transmitted zombification.
Wow. Well, it's like capitalize on the behaviors that these animals already have. If they spend their entire lives mating, let's just put that into overdrive. That's fascinating.
Yeah, but that was something that I didn't know until I started looking into this. That where did the first observations of this behavior come from, and being able to track that timeline from this one observation in 1800 to you go a few years later, and you've got scientists identifying the infectious agent as a fungus, and then they name the fungus, and then they start studying the relationship a little more closely, and then fast forward to 2019, 2020, and you have scientists starting to having the tools, which obviously were not around in 1800, to actually start doing chemical analysis of what's happening in the infected cicada's body, and being able to isolate a compound that is only in infected cicadas, which is a type of amphetamine, and which they think is linked to the hypersexualized behavior.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah.
So not only is it the host, but then the infectious agent, and then the actual chemical makeup of the infection, and all these new discoveries from that. I can imagine that there could be drugs that are made from these things, or that there's probably a fair amount of interest from multiple stakeholders in those kinds of discoveries.
Oh, absolutely. Because, of course, one of the first things that any good zombifier has to do to its host to make sure that it's not overwhelmed by the host's immune system is to disable the immune system. So one thing that scientists are looking at very closely across many different types of zombifiers is the mechanisms through which they do that, because immunosuppressive drugs is a class of drugs that scientists are very interested in for a number of uses, including organ transplants, and so that's one aspect of zombification that is, could potentially be of interest in terms of helping scientists find new medicines.
Oh, that's fascinating. I'm curious, is it like measurably more common that zombification does happen in, bugs, in insects? And is that just a function of their sheer numbers? Is it a function of the mechanisms being a little bit easier than in, let's say, vertebrates, for example?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I asked that of many scientists that I talked to,
Mm-hmm.
and what it comes down to is just how old these relationships are. So
Mm.
zombifiers and their victims, these in many of these cases, these relationships span many millions of years, and the pathways for manipulating behavior are so specific. I think one scientist called the zombifiers just nature's neuroscientists, because
Mm-hmm.
what they're doing is so precise. It's something that does not scale in the way that some types of adaptations do. So that is probably the best explanation for why so many of these zombies that you see are insects, other types of invertebrates, because because they their zombifiers evolved to manipulate things that are so specific that was not something that could translate to like a wider audience.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like we hear the example of, toxo and cats over and over and over, and I think that's the only example I know of in vertebrates.
Well, there's also rabies. The
Oh yeah,
rabies virus
rabies.
is that
Yeah,
is that
definitely
is that
changes behavior.
that does change behavior, and this it may not be something that people necessarily think of as being akin to zombification, but actually I think people do, because if you look at what was it I think and it was a 28 days later that introduced the rage virus
Mm,
as the zombifying agent, which is that's something that's associated with rabies, and rabies is something that has been documented in medical records for thousands of years, and one of the side effects of rabies is that it produces excessive salivation.
hmm.
Animals that are rabid, they foam at the mouth, and what is saliva full of? Saliva is full of millions and millions of viral particles.
Right.
So if you combine a lot of drooling and a tendency to be aggressive and bitey, then you have a perfect recipe for spreading a zombie infection or a rabies infection in this case. So actually, that is another example of something that affects vertebrates, that affects mammals, that is another example of a zombifying agent that causes a behavioral change in such a way that it benefits transmission of the virus.
It's fascinating. And you don't just obviously the sort of subtitle of the book involves parasitic mind control, but you don't only focus on parasites in your book. You do talk about viruses as well.
Well, in a sense, and that's another interesting question that you can get scientists going on about for at some length, is where viruses sort of fall in these broader discussions about what is alive and what is a
Right.
parasite, because
Yeah.
of course viruses can't reproduce themselves, they
No, they
need a
have to be
host.
in a host.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so doesn't that make them parasites?
Yeah, yeah, that's true. But it's funny that often when we talk about parasites, we aren't really talking about
No,
viruses.
No,
Yeah,
usually
that's
not.
interesting. But by definition, are viruses parasites? Um, yeah, that's so curious. So I've got to ask, as we're sort of starting to wind down, um, we've talked about some of these major classes that perhaps some of the listeners have heard of before. Is there anything that you discovered in your research, a sort of class of mind control parasite, or an outcome, for example, that like just was totally surprising to you, that you're like, why don't more people know about this?
I was actually really surprised to learn that cockroaches, which are targeted by emerald jewel wasps,
Hmm.
and are zombified by them, that they actually have a tactic for fighting back, which
Hmm.
is surprisingly successful. So emerald jewel wasps, when they attack cockroaches. Their approach is actually really, really direct in a way that's very different from the way that a lot of the other zombifiers in the book. In that they sting the cockroach directly in the brain, and
Jeez.
and it's a specific region of the brain too, because what they're doing is they're delivering a neurotoxin that essentially unplugs the cockroach's ability to walk under its own power. So it
Oh.
tinkers with locomotion. So what happens is the wasp will sting the roach in the brain, back off, give it a couple of seconds, then the roach is still able to walk, but not under its own power. So because the wasp is a little bit smaller than the cockroach, and what they have to do is they have to get the cockroach back to their nest, so where they will wall it up inside alive, so it can be a living juice box kind of for their larva.
Ew. Okay, so when
Yeah,
you say
but
not under its own power, what does that mean?
it means that it can't walk away. It can't walk away. It can't run away. But it can be led. So what?
God.
So the wasp stings the roach in the brain and then leads it to its nest and walls it up inside and is like, "All right, kid, enjoy your lunch."
And it just like follows it. I mean, obviously we can't
Yeah,
get inside of the quote mind of this cockroach, but you can imagine that it's like, no, what am I doing? Why am I
but
going with this guy? He just stung me in the brain.
yeah, but and yet off they go.
Oh my gosh.
That's something that's very direct, very specific. However, roaches do actually fight back against these zombifying
Mm-hmm.
attackers, and they do it with these roundhouse kicks. And there's this lab, the Catania lab, that filmed these encounters between roaches and these wasps. And you can see the roach kind of do this wind up, and then as the wasp comes in, the roach just kicks it
Wow.
away. And I think it was 60% of 60% of the attacks that where the wasp was kicked, they just kind of gave up and, and were like, no, I guess I don't need to zombify you today.
Wow, that's incredible. It's
Yeah.
almost, I mean, I don't know if
So
I
that
expected
was
it.
really surprising to me to learn
Yeah.
that they actually that some insect actually had a way of fighting back.
And that it's so cinematic.
It was very cinematic.
Yeah, I mean, it's not surprising to me that there is space for a lot of humor, I guess we could say, in this.
Humans can
But
find humor in anything.
yeah, like I'm curious, I guess as a final question, unless there's more that you feel like we didn't touch on, I'm curious how you set out to identify the tone for your writing and kind of stick with that throughout the book.
Well, I knew going in that it was going to be inevitable that people were going to come to the topic of zombie anything with
Mhm.
preconceptions about zombies based on their own pop culture experience,
Yeah,
right?
that's true.
So I did want to acknowledge that, and I wanted to, and that helped to set the tone for the book. I mean, just I wanted to kind of keep this balance between introducing people to all of these incredible examples of zombification in nature, the mechanisms, the questions that scientists are trying to answer, but also just to make it a little more familiar
Mhm.
by
Yeah.
by introducing these parallels between the zombies that people were already familiar with. And I think that just doing that, I think it felt like it gave me permission to make the writing a little more cinematic. So when I was talking about encounters between, say, like a zombifying wasp and a spider, I could describe it in a way that, that was more like a zombie movie, that make it more cinematic. And so that, I think, that kind of helped me find a balance that I try to keep going throughout the book of not just providing information and answering questions, but also just telling stories and trying to paint gruesome, gory pictures whenever possible of all of these different ways and horrific ways that insects and other invertebrates could be zombified.
Yeah. And I mean, I think it's so important, not just for the sake of knowledge, right? It's important to know things. It's important to understand the world around us, but it also whets our appetite for so many other, that spark of curiosity for just how weird, like, honestly, there's so much weird stuff in nature. And I think we forget that a lot because we forget to look up or we forget to look down or we forget to just like sit and observe. And what a beautiful example of, wow, if you just look closely, you'll see a whole lot of weird happening.
Yeah, and that's the other thing is that insects in particular are something that people tend to either take for granted, not look at, or want to like step on or squish or spray or something. They're something that people don't have a lot of curiosity about. They just want them. They don't want them in their houses. They don't necessarily want them in their yards, although that's outdoors. So that's a little weird. But people think of insects as being as not something that's part of their lives. But and they don't. So they don't, because they do that. They don't ever get to know all of the drama in an insect's life. Right. And once you start delving into the possibility of zombification, boy, there's so much drama there.
Oh my gosh, fascinating. Well, gosh, I can't thank you enough, not just for taking the time to write this book and to share it, but also taking an hour out of your day to talk to us about this. I know the book has been out for a bit, so everybody, you can get your copy now. The book is Rise of the Zombie Bugs: The Surprising Science of Parasitic Mind Control by Mindy Weisberger. Mindy, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Course, and everybody listening, thank you for coming back week after week. I'm really looking forward to the next time we all get together to talk nerdy.